All right, let's talk about one of the most tragic figures in comics, young Nasty Man. Now, you might just think of him as some minor villain, but his real story? Man, it's so much more complex, horrifying, and just deeply misunderstood.
To really get this, you have to ask yourself a pretty wild question. What if the supervillain wasn't the bad guy at all? What if he was actually the very first victim of the same system that created the heroes he was supposed to fight? Yeah, that's where this story really begins.
See, the thing about young Nasty Man is, he wasn't born evil. He didn't choose to be a villain, nope. He was something way, way worse. A monster that was literally manufactured for a very specific and very cruel purpose.
First thing you need to know is his real name, Terry Rebick. He was just a kid, a human orphan whose entire identity was just erased, stripped away so he could be repurposed. This isn't your typical villain origin story. It's more like a blueprint for how a monster was built, piece by piece.
So how in the world does a human orphan become a supervillain? Well, it all goes back to this shadowy, top-secret government program called the Zarathustra Experiment.
Project Zarathustra was the pet project of a scientist named Dr. Emil Garganza. A brilliant guy, for sure, but an absolute monster. His whole goal was to use alien technology he'd found from a race called the Qs to create godlike living weapons for the government. And the way he did it was it's as genius as it is horrific. First, he'd find orphans, kids nobody would miss. Then he'd implant this alien quarry's tech right into their brains. But here's where it gets truly twisted. This tech let their minds literally swap into these powerful cloned superbodies that existed in another dimension. And to keep control of them, he kept their real bodies sedated, trapping their minds inside a shared virtual reality, basically a dream. And this is the most important part. Inside that shared dream, Terry Rebick's entire life was a lie, a total fabrication. He was programmed, brainwashed, and forced to play the role of young Nasty Man. He was designed to be the designated punching bag for the experiment's heroes, someone for them to fight in their fake adventures. The kid never had a choice.
But believe it or not, the lie goes even deeper. To really understand the horror of what they did to Terry, you have to see the goofy, simplistic character they forced him to become.
So, in the fake history they pumped into all the subjects' heads, young Nasty Man was actually an alien named Pontag. A total classic, kind of silly 1950s-style bad guy. You know the type. He's from the planet Victo and gets his powers from an elixir of power. It's cartoonish, simple, and a complete and total fabrication.
And this contrast right here, this is the whole tragedy. On one hand, you have the lie, Pontag, the goofy alien villain. On the other, the reality. Terry Rebick, a human orphan who was subjected to unimaginable psychological torture, programmed against his will, with powers that were forced on him through horrific alien tech. This wasn't a character, it was a cage built inside a child's mind. So what happens when the subject of an experiment this depraved suddenly wakes up? What happens when the nightmare spills out into the real world? Well, something went wrong. We never find out exactly why, but one day, Terry Rebick woke up. His consciousness just snapped right out of that shared dream and slammed back into his real body, which had been trapped for years in some secret bunker. And when he woke up, he suddenly had access to his superhuman form, a body with the power of a god. We're talking strength to lift over 100 tons, speed faster than sound, flight, and a nearly impenetrable force field. All of that power, now in the hands of a terrified, confused, and traumatized child. His mind was shattered. I mean, can you even imagine waking from a dream you thought was your entire life, only to find you're a prisoner, that your body has been violated and you have these incredible powers you can't even comprehend? He wasn't evil, he was just completely insane, lashing out from pure pain and terror. His freedom was tragically short. He wakes up, breaks out of the lab, and goes on a confused, murderous rampage. Dr. Gargunza was forced to release another test subject, Miracle Woman, to try and stop him. The fight ends with Terry falling into an erupting volcano. Just like that. A short, brutal end to a tortured existence. But Terry Rebick's story doesn't just end there. His real significance is what he represents. A grim warning, and the first dark mirror of a much, much greater tragedy that was still to come.
The thing is, young Nasty Man's breakdown was a terrifying foreshadowing of what was going to happen to another member of the program, a kid named Johnny Bates, who would later become the infamous Kid Miracle Man.
Look at this. They were two sides of the same horrible coin, both victims of Project Zarathustra. But while the trauma fractured Terry's mind and drove him insane, it twisted Johnny Bates's mind into something else. Pure, calculating sociopathy. Terry's rampage was a brief, localized tragedy. Bates's evil? That would become a global catastrophe. And that's his ultimate legacy. He was the first sign that something was horribly wrong with Gargunz's experiment, the first casualty of a program that treated children like lab rats. His death was the canary in the coal mine, warning of a much larger disaster on the horizon.
Which kind of leaves us with this one last thought. In a world where heroes are created in a lab and their adventures are a complete lie, how do you even begin to define what a villain is? If a hero's entire identity is just a fabrication, can we ever really understand the tragedy of the villain they were literally designed to destroy?